Today we would be covering number one, how to find out as to how is the financial stability of our vendor, and then we would look at how to figure out in case if a particular company, in case if a particular vendor, in case if a particular supplier is indulging into diversion of funds from the business, and then we would look at the fund flow statement. After the fund flow statement, friends, we would be looking at financial leverage, as I was discussing yesterday, that borrowing has got very distinct advantages. What those advantages are and how those advantages accrue, that is what we will discuss. After that, we would be shifting to some of the cost concepts, understanding as to what the different types of costs are, and also understand the marginal costing and the break-even analysis. And we will also understand operating leverage. And this is something which is very interesting. So operating leverage is something that helps us to earn multiple times profit than the increase in the sales. So what is the operating leverage? How does it work? That is what we would cover in this session. And finally, friends, we would be covering some of the specific problems with regard to the GST that we face in our day-to-day working, and how to resolve them, how to ensure that those problems do not occur. So friends, this is the agenda that we have for today's program. Now I'm sure all of you would recollect that I had given you 7 case studies, and all of you came out with your own responses, and those responses were really almost hitting on the head of the nail, and I'm really very happy about your responses. Now friends, if you analyze, and I'm sure that you must have done yesterday, तो जब आपने ये 7 केस स्टडीज को जब स्टडी किया होगा, तो I am sure in the end you must have come to one conclusion. And what is that conclusion? That conclusion is that ultimately all the informations which are required for all these 7 cases are more or less same. So what is required for case number 1 is also required for case number 3 and case number 7. What is required for case number 7 is also required for case number 2 and case number 5. And which means what? Which means the solution to all the financial problems lie in a common area. And what that common area is? That common area is, if we have to resolve any problem in finance, if we have to analyze any company from any perspective, what we have to understand, we have to understand 5 things, as I was telling you yesterday, and quickly I would mention it once again. Number 1, we need to look at the profitability. How is the profitability of a business? Number 2, liquidity. Is the business liquid enough to take care of its financial obligations? Number 3, the operating efficiency of the assets. And I'm sure you can understand, only if a business is using its assets efficiently, then only it would be able to generate profit, or bumper profit, or attractive profit, or handsome profit, not otherwise. So we look at number 3 is operating efficiency. Number 4, financial leverage. I'm going to discuss that in much detail, but financial leverage का मतलब है to borrow. You know why it is called as leveraging? It is because you know जब आप गाड़ी का जब लीवर, फिर किसी जमाने में जब गाड़ी में लीवर हुआ करता था, तो आप गियर चेंज करने के लिए लीवर का इस्तेमाल करते थे, और आपको याद होगा जैसे ही आप गियर चेंज करते थे लीवर को दबा के, ऑटोमेटिकली आपकी गाड़ी की स्पीड बढ़ जाती थी. सेम इज द इफेक्ट ऑफ फाइनेंशियल लेवरेज ऑल्सो. सो व्हाट इज फाइनेंशियल लेवरेज and how does it work? We will examine it, but remember that is the 4th thing that we have to check, financial leverage. And the 5th, of course, is solvency. Solvency is basically whether the business has the ability to take care of all its obligations, short term as well as the long term. So friends, these are the 5 things that we need to look at for evaluating any company for any decision or for any situation. Yes, please.
I would like to interrupt.
Yes, please.
What is basically difference between solvency and liquidity?
Yes,
because purpose of liquidity and solvency is the same, to mitigate the short-term obligation or long-term obligation.
Okay, very good.
How is it different?
Yeah, very good. So let me give you a very interesting answer to your question. Liquidity is short-term solvency, and solvency is long-term liquidity. लिक्विडिटी इट्स शॉर्ट टर्म सॉल्वेंसी. सॉल्वेंसी का मतलब क्या है? सॉल्वेंसी का मतलब है अबिलिटी ऑफ अ बिजनेस टू टेक केयर ऑफ इट्स शॉर्ट ऑब्लिगेशंस. दैट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ सॉल्वेंसी. सो लिक्विडिटी इज शॉर्ट टर्म सॉल्वेंसी and solvency is long term liquidity, and that is the difference between the liquidity and solvency. I hope that answers your query very quickly.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Now, so having understood these 5 things, let us understand how it is done in Tata Motors. Tata Motors में कैसे करते हैं? We had discussed it yesterday, and therefore I'm going to be a little brief when it comes to our discussion on this. But I'm going to take you, friends, through the entire process, so that you become completely aware as to what is the significance of different steps that we have in Tata Motors methodology for the financial analysis of our vendors. Now, this is what we have in case of Tata Motors. So, ये जो आपके स्क्रीन पे आपको दिखाई दे रहा है, this is the financial analysis methodology of Tata Motors, which is used for evaluating the vendors of Tata Motors. As I mentioned to you yesterday, this model has got 3 components. Component number 1, it uses the Altman Z score. Remember, as I mentioned yesterday, Altman was a professor of finance in the Stern University in US. He did some research, and based on his research, he identified 5 different factors that, in his view, would decide whether a company is going to be, if a company is heading towards bankruptcy. So he took into account 5 factors, and those 5 factors were liquidity that we have just discussed, profitability, operating efficiency, solvency, and asset utilization. So these are the 5 factors which Altman discovered that they would lead him to come to a conclusion if a company is solvent or it is not solvent, or it is heading towards insolvency. And what he did for these different factors, he took certain he should assign certain weightages. So remember, the Altman का जो मॉडल था, उसके जो वेटेजेस हैं वो अलग हैं, बिकॉज वो यूएस की सिचुएशन में थे और इंडिया की सिचुएशन थोड़ी अलग हो जाती है. तो दिस मॉडल दैट वी हैव इन टाटा मोटर्स, उसके जो वेटेजेस हैं दे आर डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द वेटेजेस फ्रॉम द वंस दैट वर टेकन बाय Altman. दिस इज ओनली फॉर योर एडिशनल इंफॉर्मेशन. But I would like to mention here, and please look at the screen. So what is the weightage for liquidity? It is 0.717. For the profitability is 0.847. For operating efficiency it is 3.10. It is 3.10. For solvency it is just 0.420. And for asset utilization it is 0.998. So please understand now, what does it mean? It means if operating efficiency has got a weightage of 3 and the total weightage is 6, so total जो 6 weightage है उसमें से 3 यानी कि 50% is for the operating efficiency. इसका मतलब क्या है? इसका मतलब ये है कि अगर एक बिजनेस की ऑपरेटिंग एफिशिएंसीज अच्छी हैं, so there is a full possibility that this business will not have any difficulty in any other area. And you can also see that the weightage for the asset utilization is again 0.998, which is virtually 1. So out of 6, 4 weightage is assigned to the operating efficiency and asset utilization, and that highlights the need for any business to put focus on building operating efficiencies. So these are the weightages. Now, how these ratios are calculated? So you can see on your screen liquidity ratio, how it is calculated. You can see current assets minus current liabilities divided by total assets. Now for your information, friends, traditionally, conventionally, current ratio is calculated as current assets divided by current liabilities. But in this model, it has been taken differently. And which means what? Which means, please remember, in finance, whatever knowledge that you have, it is not that you have to follow strictly whatever it is given there, because please remember, the knowledge of finance is to help you to take a decision, and therefore if any change in the given structure, if it is going to help you take a better decision, of course you can do that. So in this model, which is of ultimate Z score model, the current ratio is calculated differently, liquidity ratio is calculated differently, and that is current assets minus current liabilities divided by the total assets. And we will do it for a company, for a supplier of ours together. Then profitability ratio. How the profitability ratio is calculated, you can see it on the screen. Retained earnings divided by total assets. So this is how the profitability ratio is calculated. Then you got a operating efficiency ratio. How the operating efficiency ratio is calculated? It is calculated as EBIT. I'm sure you will remember. EBIT is earning before interest and tax, which is same as the operating profit. So EBIT divided by the total assets will give you the operating efficiency. And solvency. So how do you calculate the solvency? Again, you can see on your screen, book value of equity divided by the total liabilities. And you know what is the total liabilities? Current liabilities plus the non-current liabilities put together is total liabilities. Book value of equity, it is same as the value of the shareholders capital or shareholders funds. And finally, asset utilization ratio. How do you calculate the asset utilization ratio? You calculate the asset utilization ratio, sales divided by total assets. And that means what? That means it tells you as to what kind of turnover, what kind of revenue, what kind of income your assets are generating. So this is the first element in case of Tata Motors financial analysis methodology, right? That is first component, and first component is ultimate Z score. So ultimate Z score has got 5 ratios. First you calculate those 5 ratios, then you have to multiply these ratios with the given weightages, and then you will come to some score. And if that score which is arrived by you, and we will do it collectively, that score which is arrived by you, if it is less than 1.23, that means the company is in a distressed state. तो अल्टीमेट जेड के मॉडल को यूज करते हुए अगर इस कंपनी का स्कोर 1.23 से कम है, that means this company is in a bad state. This company can sink anytime. This company can become bankrupt anytime based on the ultimate Z score. If the score is coming between 1.23 to 2.34, that means it is in a gray zone. It's in a gray zone. That means you have to be watchful. We have to be careful. And if the number is coming, score is coming over 2.34, that means it is in safe zone. It is in safe zone. So that is the component number 1, ultimate Z score. Number 2, it has got the second component, which is interest coverage ratio. Now remember, what is the meaning of interest coverage ratio? I am sure you can understand it very easily. इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो का क्या मतलब है? इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो का ये मतलब है कि ये कंपनी वो जो प्रॉफिट जनरेट कर रही है, दिस प्रॉफिट इज इनफ हाउ मेनी टाइम्स टू पे द इंटरेस्ट लायबिलिटी ऑफ द कंपनी, एंड दैट इज इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो. दैट मीन्स द प्रॉफिट्स जनरेटेड बाय द कंपनी आर गुड इनफ to cover the interest how many times, and that is the interest coverage ratio. How do you calculate the interest coverage ratio? You can see on your screen. So EBIT divided by the interest. So EBIT divided by the interest will give you your interest coverage ratio. Of course, higher the better. जितना ज़्यादा होगा उतना अच्छा है. Now, as per this model that we have, if this ratio, if the interest coverage ratio is less than 1.5, that's a bad situation. If the ratio is between 1.5 to 2.6, it is in the gray zone. You have to be careful. You have to be watchful. And if the ratio is more than 2.16, so if the interest coverage ratio is more than 2.16, that means this company is having sufficient short-term liquidity. This company is having enough profitability and sufficient short-term liquidity if the score is more than 2.6. If the ratio is more than 2.6, and then you have a third element. And the third element, as you can see on your screen, is net debt equity ratio for long-term solvency. Please remember, as Tata Motors, what is our interest in dealing with our suppliers, our vendors? We are interested in the solvency of our suppliers and the vendors. And are we interested only in the short term solvency? No, we are interested in the short term solvency, and we are also interested in the long term solvency. So for the short term solvency, we will use the interest coverage ratio, and for the long term solvency, to find out the long term solvency of a supplier of ours or of a vendor of ours, what we will do, we will use the net debt equity ratio. And how do we calculate the net debt equity ratio? You can see it on the screen. Borrowings, and I'm sure you know, borrowings are given in the balance sheet. Borrowings minus the cash and cash equivalent divided by the equity, right? So of course, जितना ये रेशो कम होगा उतना बेटर है, जितना ये रेशो ज़्यादा होगा उतना खतरनाक है। क्यों खतरनाक है? क्योंकि अगर ये रेशो बहुत ज़्यादा है, इसका मतलब दिस कंपनी हैज़ गॉट टू मच ऑफ बोरोइंग, एंड प्लीज रिमेंबर, टू मच ऑफ बोरोइंग बाय एनी कंपनी इज ऑलवेज रिस्की। एंड व्हाई इट इज ऑलवेज रिस्की? बिकॉज अगर आपकी बोरोइंग बहुत ज़्यादा है, इसका मतलब आपकी इंटरेस्ट लायबिलिटी बहुत ज़्यादा है, और अगर आपकी इंटरेस्ट लायबिलिटी बहुत ज़्यादा है और खुदा न खास्ता अनफॉर्चुनेटली गॉड फॉरबिड अगर मार्केट नीचे आ गया, अगर मार्केट कंडीशंस थोड़ी वीक हो गई, तो आपके प्रॉफिट नीचे हो जाएंगे। प्रॉफिट नीचे हो जाएंगे, देन यू मे नॉट हैव इनफ कैश to pay the interest. And remember, if you don't pay the interest, if you don't repay the loan to the lender can file an application in NCLT for the insolvency resolution process of this company. So that is why जितना ये रेशियो कम होगा उतना बेटर है, राइट? एंड उसका जो क्राइटेरिया है, उसका क्राइटेरिया है, इफ द रेशियो इज मोर देन 4, if your net debt equity ratio is more than 4, that means it's a distressed state, it's in a bad situation. If the ratio is between 2.6 to 4, then it is gray area. That means you have to be watchful. This company has to be really looked at with a magnifying glass every now and then. And if the ratio is less than 2.67, that means it is in safe zone. So friends, these are the three components that are used in Tata Motors financial analysis methodology that is used for evaluating the financial stability of our vendors. So now, having calculated now these three ratios, now what we do, we come to the next stage. We come to the next stage, and in the next stage what we do, as you can see on your screen. तो अब आपने क्या किया, आपने एक let's say for example you are evaluating a vendor XYZ. तो XYZ का आपने Altman Z स्कोर कैलकुलेट किया। कैसे कैलकुलेट किया? जो हमने प्रोसेस अभी थोड़ी देर पहले डिस्कस किया, उसको यूज करते हुए आपने एक वेंडर का Altman Z स्कोर कैलकुलेट किया, और वो जो भी उसका स्कोर आया उसके हिसाब से आप उसको रेटिंग असाइन करोगे। यानी कि अगर उसका स्कोर 0 भी नहीं है, 0 से नीचे है, तो इसका मतलब उसकी रेटिंग 1 हो जाएगी। लेकिन अगर Altman Z का स्कोर 4 के ऊपर आ रहा है, 4 या उसके ऊपर आ रहा है, तो आप उसको 10 का स्कोर दोगे। और अगर उसका जो Altman Z का जो स्कोर है अगर बीच में आ रहा है, तो ये जो आप स्क्रीन पर देख रहे हैं उसके हिसाब से आप उस वेंडर को स्कोर असाइन करोगे। दैट इज यूजिंग द Altman Z स्कोर। दैट इज स्टेप नंबर 1। स्टेप नंबर 2, नाउ दैट यू विल लुक एट द इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो। तो आपने इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो कैलकुलेट किया, अपने उस वेंडर का XYZ का जिसका कि आप इवैल्यूएशन कर रहे हो, डिपेंडिंग ऑन उसका इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो कितना है, आप उसको अगेन यू विल असाइन अ रेटिंग टू हिम। से फॉर एग्जांपल हिज इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो इज लेस देन 1, दैट मींस यू विल असाइन अ 0 टू हिम। आप समझ सकते हैं क्यों? क्योंकि अगर इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो लेस देन 0 है, इसका मतलब ये कंपनी की शॉर्ट टर्म लिक्विडिटी कुछ है ही नहीं, कंपनी के पास में प्रॉफिट है ही नहीं कि इंटरेस्ट भरे, तो शॉर्ट टर्म लिक्विडिटी नहीं है। सो इफ द रेशियो इज लेस देन 1, then you assign a 0. If the interest coverage ratio is 4 or more than 4, then you give him 10 full marks, 10 marks. और अगर उसका स्कोर बीच में है, so as you can see it on the screen, then you will assign the rating to him as the case may be. Depending on his score, you assign a rating to him. That is stage number 2. Then you come to the third स्टेज, एंड द थर्ड स्टेज आपने उसका डेट इक्विटी रेशियो, नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो कैलकुलेट किया, और नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो कैलकुलेट किया, और आपको मालूम है जितना ये नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो जितना कम होगा उतना बेटर है, और जितना ज़्यादा होगा उतना खतरनाक है। तो अगर इस XYZ का जिसका क्या आप इवेल्युएशन कर रहे हैं उसका नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो अगर 6 के ऊपर है, दैट मीन्स यू विल असाइन अ 0 स्कोर टू हिम, और उसका नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो 0 भी नहीं है, 0 से कम है, तो आप उसको पूरा 10 के 10 मार्क्स देंगे। और अगर उसका नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो 6 और 0 के बीच में है, देन एज यू कैन सी इट ऑन योर स्क्रीन, उसके हिसाब से आप उसको स्कोर असाइन करेंगे। सो अभी आपने क्या किया, पहले आपने उसका अल्टीमेट जेड स्कोर कैलकुलेट किया, उसके बाद में आपने उसका इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो कैलकुलेट किया, उसके बाद में आपने उसका आपने नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो कैलकुलेट किया। ये तीनों कैलकुलेट करने के बाद में डिपेंडिंग ऑन व्हाट इज स्कोर आपने उसको रेटिंग दे दी कि 0 to 10। अब आपको क्या करना है, अब आपको जो भी उसका जो स्कोर आया है, सो वेंडर स्कोर इन ईच कैटेगरी विल बी मल्टीप्लाइड बाय 10। सो अल्टीमेट जेड का स्कोर जो भी उसका आया है उसको 10 से मल्टीप्लाई करेंगे, और इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो का जो भी उसका स्कोर आया है उसको आप 10 से मल्टीप्लाई करेंगे, और नेट डेट इक्विटी रेशियो जो भी उसका आया होगा आप उसको 10 से मल्टीप्लाई करेंगे, और जो तीनों को मल्टीप्लाई करके जो टोटल आएगा आप उसको ऐड करेंगे, और ऐड करके फिर आप उसको 3 से डिवाइड कर देंगे। तो 3 से डिवाइड जब आप करेंगे तो वो जो नंबर आएगा दैट नंबर इज गोइंग टू बी समवेयर बिटवीन 0 to 100। सो आप जब ये करेंगे तो दैट नंबर इज गोइंग टू बी बिटवीन 0 to 100। नाउ डिपेंडिंग ऑन where that number is, then you will do the categorization. As you can see on your screen, if this number which is coming is more than 70, that means green का मतलब safe है। If the score is between 40 to 70, that means it is in between, gray area है, ध्यान रखना है, watchful रहना है। और अगर ये स्कोर 40 के नीचे है, that means it is in a bad state, this vendor is in a bad state, this vendor has to be watchful, this vendor has to be careful, or rather this vendor has to be avoided, or this vendor has to be informed that your financials are not in line with the expectations of Tata Motors, and therefore please work to improve your ratios, your numbers, your financials, so that your rating as per the Tata methodology is increased, and then in that case only we would be able to depend and rely as far as supply of components or the parts from you is concerned. So friend, this is how the entire Tata Motors financial analysis methodology works for evaluating different suppliers or different vendors. Now मैं आपको आधा अधूरा छोड़ने वाला नहीं हूं, तो अब मैं क्या करूंगा, अब मैं ये पूरा प्रोसेस आपके साथ में एक लाइव केस स्टडी में करके करूंगा और आपको बताऊंगा कि किस तरह से ये पूरा प्रोसेस काम करता है, एंड वी विल यूज द नंबर्स ऑफ वन ऑफ आवर सप्लायर्स।